All right, as you can see, John and I are practicing social distancing. We've got just a little over 6 feet, 6 feet 3 inches. And we're here. We decided we would make the best of our self-quarantine time. And we've been watching all the updates, the reports from the White House.
Thank God for Mike Pence and his team.
Thank God for the President of the United States, who's handled this unlike any other administration before him.
Like never before.
Like never, ever before have we seen anything like this. Thank you, Mr. President, for being so great and protecting us the way you do.
Can we have just a quick moment of silence?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Right now, John and I decided we would pass the time by watching today's update briefing from the White House. And we noticed that our great and all-powerful Vice President, Mike Pence, loves to praise the President, like we all should, right, John?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah. Oh, Mr. President. The President has done this. The President has done that. So what are we going to do, John?
We're going to take a sip of beer, not a large sip, not a gulp, just a normal sip. Every time Mike Pence refers to Mr. President or thank you, Mr. President, or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think it's a way that John and I can pay our respects to this administration who's done such great things for us, especially during this crisis.
Like never before.
Are you ready, John?
I'm ready.
Okay, here comes the Vice President now.
Good afternoon, all. And thank you, Mr. President. The White House Coronavirus Task Force met today. We briefed the President on our latest recommendations. We continue at the President's direction to lead not a whole of government approach, but a whole of America approach. You just heard the President describe one inspiring story after another at the way the American people are responding, the way American businesses are responding, religious communities across this country.
Trustworthy IPA, by the way.
Together.
It's great for this game.
Religious communities across this country. And the American people are coming together. They're responding with common sense, compassion, and generosity. People are heeding the advice of state and local authorities, and tens of millions of Americans are putting into practice 15 days to slow the spread. We are officially, Mr. President, 6 days into our 15 days. And as we look all across this country, while we strongly support the decisions that governors in states where we have significant outbreak have taken, and we encourage every American to listen to those state and local authorities, for every American, this is what you can do to make a difference.
It's up to you, Mike.
Over the next week.
We're all in this together.
And a few days to protect your health, protect your family's health, but most especially slow the spread and the potential for the coronavirus to impact the most vulnerable. As the President said, we've almost been overwhelmed at the outpouring of support from American businesses. The President spoke yesterday to thousands of small businesses. We spoke to manufacturers yesterday. And in fact, as the President indicated, the FDA in record time just approved one manufacturer that will be producing millions of surgical masks in a matter of weeks for the American people.
Millions.
The pastors we spoke to, we want to thank all the religious leaders from every community of faith in the country, making the hard choice to suspend services, to have online services, even while those ministries are continuing to support food banks and come alongside the most vulnerable. And of course, the chorus of prayers that is coming up from communities of faith around the country is making the difference that it always has in the life of this nation. One thing the President and I promised was to remind people that on the weekends that you're not in the pews, it's still a good idea to, if you can, to go ahead and make that donation, because all the ministries are continuing to play a vital role in our communities, and we encourage your continued support. The President and I are grateful that the American people are listening to state and local authorities and putting into practice all of the recommendations in the President's coronavirus guidelines. As you will hear in just a few moments from Admiral Gua, testing is expanding rapidly across the United States of America. State-run drive-thrus are expanding across the country. And as you will hear detailed this morning, now more than 195,000 Americans and more who have been symptomatic have been tested.
190,000
That
and
number
more.
does not include county hospitals or healthcare labs around the nation, some 15,000 in number. And among the number of the more than 195,000 that have been tested, it's important to remember that only 19,343 at this moment
I'm afraid you're not
have
taking
tested
this seriously,
positive
John.
for the coronavirus. We continue to urge state and local health authorities to contact FEMA for all the latest developments and innovations in testing. But we want to remind Americans, as Dr. Fauci will emphasize in a moment, if you don't have symptoms, don't do a test. It is another way
You can't see this,
that
but
the American people can make sure that
on
we are preserving
President
the
Trump's
resources
face,
that our health
you can tell he's just waiting for Mike Pence to mention him
Those
again.
who are dealing with the coronavirus.
He almost looks distraught
and
that he hasn't
illnesses.
been mentioned
In a moment,
in seconds.
Pete Gaynor will detail the efforts at FEMA. Since the President's national emergency declaration, we have FEMA in the lead, stood up the National Response Coordination Center, as the President said, and we are working closely, literally hour by hour, through FEMA, processing requests from states most impacted, like New York, Washington State, and California, and we'll continue to work very, very closely with those states through the very traditional means of federal emergency management at FEMA. Secretary Carson will describe decisive actions the President alluded to bring foreclosure relief to Americans. And on the subject of supplies, in a moment you will hear of not only the progress that we're making on testing, but on Monday we'll be detailing for the American people the progress that we are making on the President's strategy of procuring more personal protective equipment and medical supplies, allocating them through the system of FEMA, and continuing to urge conservation by Americans. In fact, I'm pleased to report to the President today that HHS just placed an order for hundreds of millions of N95 masks that will be being made available to healthcare providers across the country. On behalf of the President, we do renew our call for Americans to postpone elective medical procedures,
say hundreds and
including
hundreds
dental
of masks?
services. And remember, this is another way
Hundreds of thousands, maybe. I don't
that you're
know.
going to make sure that medical supplies
back,
are
I think you
available,
said
because
hundreds and hundreds.
by postponing elective medical procedures, you're freeing up medical supplies for those dealing with the coronavirus. As the President mentioned, our team is on Capitol Hill as we speak, working with members of Congress in both political parties. They're making progress, by all accounts, on a bipartisan bill. They worked late into the night last night, started early this morning, and we are working to pass that legislation on Monday in both the House and the Senate. Now, on a personal note, many of you may have been made aware that a member of my staff has tested positive for the coronavirus. We learned of that late yesterday. I am pleased to report that he is doing well. He had mild cold-like symptoms for about a day and a half, has not been to the White House since Monday. Neither the President nor I had direct contact
I get love.
with that staff person.
He's
We
almost
worked
done, I think.
immediately with the White House physician and the
Better
CDC.
ration.
We've done all contact tracing. And while the White House doctor has indicated that he has no reason to believe that I was exposed and no need to be tested, given the unique position that I have as Vice President and as the leader of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, both I and my wife will be tested for the coronavirus later this afternoon. Let me say again how grateful the President and I are that every American has acted on the President's coronavirus guidelines. We are 6 days into 15 days.
You missed one. You missed one.
That, as Dr. Fauci may well reflect in a moment, is an opportunity
Okay, that's
for
good.
us
Okay.
here on the footholds
I
of
missed
this
one, so
you missed one.
epidemic curve in our country to literally lower the impact in our nation and save lives. Every American can do their part to slow the spread, and we encourage you each to continue to do that. As the President says often, remember, we're all in this together. And also remember that for most Americans, the risk of serious illness from the coronavirus remains low. The reason we want to put into practice the President's coronavirus guidelines is because no American would want to inadvertently expose someone who is vulnerable, a senior with a serious underlying health condition, to the coronavirus with a potential threat. I did hear one story this morning, Mr. President, about a senior named Geneva Wood. She actually is at the Life Care Center in Kirkland, Washington. She is not only a grandmother, she is a great grandmother. 90
You're taking
years
more than me?
young, and she
That's a big
tested
mouth.
positive for the coronavirus on March 6th.
Say that again.
But by all accounts, she's doing well. She wanted America to know there is hope. And her strength and her enthusiasm is truly an inspiration to the nation. As the President said many times, we're going to get through this and come out stronger than ever before. And we'll get through this as Americans together. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike.
Ooh. So obviously, Vice President Mike Pence is giving our president the respect and credit that he deserves through this crisis. He's getting us through this safely. Apparently, the virus is already being eradicated in our country, and there are now some
We have some supplies now. We have
Some
masks,
supplies?
and ventilators
Right.
being produced.
And-
Thanks to the president.
Yeah, and apparently now there are therapies that will cure us from the virus. Thank you, Mr. President,
Here's some, Miss President.
and thank you to the Vice President for giving President Trump the credit that is due at this challenging time.
Hail the chief.